North Dakota State head coach Matt Entz, now a part of the Lincoln Riley staff, or will be at USC. Ryan Abraham, our go-to at InsideTroy.com, covering USC. Ryan, what kind of a hire is this, and kind of how much it does boost his staff?
Yeah, I think let's go out and get some, additions to this defensive staff. Getting D'Anton Lynn over from UCLA, I thought was a big one, just because you're taking a coach away from a rival. And then whenever you get a head coach that's had a lot of success, even at the FCS level, to kind of join your staff and bolster things as a position coach, it'll be a little bit more than that, I think, for him. But I think it's a good one for USC. It probably means that Brian Odom, who came over with Lincoln Riley from Oklahoma, is probably not going to be on the staff anymore. But we thought this was going to be more than just a defensive coordinator offseason. The defense was bad all around. I don't think anybody's job was safe. So it looks like a pretty good hire, at least on paper, so far for Lincoln Riley.
How much does Lincoln Riley need to do this to get kind of his swing back? Because the way that they lost at the end of last season, the way that this season did not go with the best player in America, how they wanted to go, does he need the defense to help him reestablish that he's Lincoln freaking Riley?
That's a great way to put it. And it's hard for me, because when you go out and hire somebody with that sort of resume, they have a little bit of a leash. You give them some time. And I don't know if it was just the style of offense, especially a lot of the old school USC fans don't want to see. They still want to see like student body left, student body right, all that kind of stuff. There's anything associated with an air raid, and not that he runs that fully, but I think that just kind of gets downvoted by fans just in general. If you're winning, it's fine. But once like you mentioned, the end of last year didn't end the way they wanted. They start off 6-0. They weren't even behind in a game for the first 5 games, and then they lose 5 of the last 6 and just look terrible, especially on the defensive side. He's lost a lot of the fan base, which to me is kind of shocking, but I guess that's the way modern college football works right now. So I think some of it is just sort of getting some of that back from the fans, just to be like, hey, I'm still Lincoln, like you said, I'm still Lincoln for Riley. We're going to get the defense fixed. The offense is still going to be good, and win a bunch of games going to the Big Ten. But the shine has come off a little bit, and I think it's faster than I ever thought it would be. But like I said, it's probably just the way college football is right now.
Ryan, as far as Matt Entz goes, I mean, what have kind of been your initial, I guess, in your research, things that stood out? But also, where does he, in your mind, get started when it comes to getting to work on retooling this defense?
Yeah, I think if you go back, 4 or 5 years, even, later in the Clay Helton era, different defensive coordinators, different linebackers, they just have not got a lot of production out of the linebacker spot. I mean, they've had like a guy like Tuli Tuipulotu lead the nation in sacks. They've had guys have like All-American type of seasons, like a Kalen Bullock in the secondary, and they've had talent at linebacker. They just haven't been able to have these guys that are very productive, and I think that's where you want a lot of your production to come from. I mean, if your secondary is making a lot of tackles, there's probably something wrong in your front seven. I think the linebackers can fix a lot of problems up front and and behind them, and it just seems like they've not been productive there. So, recruiting and talent acquisition and all that stuff, is important. But I think really developing that position and having them putting guys that are athletic in a position to shine and lead the team in tackles and get a bunch of takeaways. Whatever you need to do to get that production going at a linebacker spot, you could just impact so much from there. And USC's it's sort of been like a black hole. So I think that's the biggest thing. Develop these guys a little bit, but get them to be productive members. We just haven't seen that kind of production that you need at a linebacker spot for several years at USC.
Ryan, only because we like to clarify things. Obviously, Kaden Williams is not going to play in the bowl game. He's going to be perhaps the number 1 pick in the draft. I can't imagine maybe 1 or 2. Drake May is entering the draft too. But was there any kind of disagreement between Lincoln Riley and Caleb on opting out of the bowl game? Or is that just smoke that was out there from social media type people?
Yeah, we haven't heard anything along those lines. They were kind of keeping everything sort of close as far as like what he was going to do. I mean, Caleb, his family had said things about potentially coming back, but it just none of that sort of pass the smell test over, when people would ask me, I'm like, I can't see any scenario where he would come back, but it's called, anything could happen. But yeah, I think this is just more, it's kind of a business decision. If it was a better bowl game, I think, he's the kind of guy when, he's just a very competitive player. And if it was playing in a New Year's Six bowl or a better bowl, or obviously even like the playoffs, I think he's playing for sure. But the fact that they lost 5 of the last 6, playing in the bowl game is probably not going to help his draft stock all that much. So I feel like that's just sort of like the decision that was made there. But to my knowledge, there wasn't any sort of rift between those guys. They seem to be, pretty close as far as, working together, the 2 seasons that they were at USC and then, of course, the season in Oklahoma too. So I kind of think that's sort of where it was. And if they were in a better bowl game, he probably would have played. But because it was, just a holiday bowl, you're 7-5, just kind of move on and get ready for the draft.
All right, finish this sentence for me, Ryan. The starting quarterback in 2024 at USC will be.
I have no idea. I would say right now it's probably, I'm going to go Miller Moss. They have Malachi Nelson, who was the 5-star, but we just haven't seen a lot of him. He came in sort of banged up a little bit, and Miller Moss has really just been the guy, the number 2 guy. He's going to get all the first team reps and practice getting into the bowl game, but I think it's still TBD because we know that Lincoln Riley's met with like Will Howard from Kansas State, and there's other players, Cam Moore, guys that are just in the mix as far as like being talked to, and maybe they haven't, maybe he hasn't made a decision to bring somebody in. But I feel like you could bring somebody in like a stopgap, like a 5th-year guy that's going to play 1 year. You could bring in someone that's younger, that would have more time to sort of develop and probably be more of a competition where you're not just bringing in a guy to be the starter, or you could bring in a depth guy because they're not going to have a lot of scholarship quarterbacks on the roster. So maybe it goes with Miller Moss or Malachi Nelson and you bring someone else to kind of help with depth. So I think there's some options for Lincoln Riley. My gut is, though, he's going to go out and get somebody. But since they haven't got anybody yet, I'm going to go with Miller Moss, and then we'll see, after that. Maybe, he could wow everybody at bowl practices and then the bowl game and kind of secure it, or at least, give him a leg up when it comes to the starting spot next year. But if I had to bet, I'm betting he's probably going to bring somebody in over the next couple of weeks. And then that person would likely be the favorite in the clubhouse to be the starter next year.
Ryan, it's interesting. The Pac-12 title game came down to 2 teams that'll be going along with USC to the Big Ten. Texas ends up winning the Big 12 in their final, season. Obviously, USC would have liked to have ended things similarly. But what was that final season in the Pac-12 like from your point of view? Was it hostile crowds? Was it anything different, really? Or is that just kind of a media creation? How did you feel about that final run in the Pac?
Yeah, USC didn't get to play either team that's staying. So they lost, or they missed Washington State and Oregon State, but everyone else was leaving. So it's kind of one of those things that you can't really be hostile anymore. If the Pac-12 had tried to stay together and maybe just Colorado left and everyone else stayed, and they were going to add like San Diego State, I think it might have changed things. Like playing Utah or playing Arizona, those kind of schools. I think it would be a little crazier. But because everybody sort of just dispersed and everyone left. I don't think there was that way. I think maybe like the Apple Cup and the Civil War. I think Washington and Oregon were able to win both those, but I think both those teams that were left behind, the Cougars and the Beavs, I think were both kind of fired up for that one. But I think if it was only USC and UCLA leaving, or maybe just Colorado joining them, I think it would have been a little bit more hostile. But because everyone was going, I think everyone was sort of worried, taking care of your own house as opposed to worrying about USC screwed the Pac-12 and sank this ship, so we're going to get mad. It just seemed like everybody was kind of doing their own thing.
Do you like the fact that Oregon and Washington are joining the fray as well?
I think it's better for West Coast. I mean, just because I think we don't know how this travel thing is going to work out, especially with the non-revenue sports. I think that's not going to be something you could sustain. I think they're going to have to figure that out sooner rather than later. But the football part you can do. But having some West Coast partners here, which it's not an easy trip to get to Seattle, but it's easier than getting to like Maryland. So I feel like if you're going to have some West Coast schools with you, having big brands like Oregon and Washington would help. I mean, Cal, Stanford, like those are, it would be nice just because they're kind of rivals. They played each other forever, and they're still in the state. It's a quick trip, but they they haven't taken football as seriously as like an Oregon or Washington has. So I think it makes the Big Ten Conference a lot better, and just having some West Coast kind of partnership. It's also something where, like, Penn State's only West Coast trip might not be to USC or UCLA. They might have to go to Seattle or something too. So I feel like if you were to only two teams on the West Coast, I think you'd be a little bit of a disadvantage. And having a couple more teams, I think, helps spread that out a little bit. But it's going to be tough. I mean, those are tough road trips. But I think it's good for those teams to have some extra West Coast schools there on the football side. And we'll see. I think it helps with the Olympic sports and stuff as well.
Yeah, and USC can still cross paths with Cal and Stanford in the airport, as USC is going to Rutgers and Cal and Stanford are going to North Carolina to play their conference games. Wild world of realignment, right?
It's crazy. I mean, it's hard to imagine that this is really happening. And, we're still waiting on the exact schedule for Oregon State, Washington State. The fact they don't even know who they're going to play. I mean, they know who they play, but not like when they're playing and all that stuff is crazy. And all the schedules came out later. And when you sort of like reset and go through the off season and be like, all right, next year, here's what the schedule looks like. It's just nuts. And it's just one of those things where you're going to like look around halfway through the schedule and go, oh my God, this isn't working. Why are we doing this? It's for money, but I feel like we might have some moments like that, especially on the non-revenue sports side. Like, I don't even know what's going to happen there, but it's sort of like it was like this avalanche. You're just kind of there's no way to stop it, and it happened, and we're gonna like kind of look at the aftermath after next season, and we go like, what did we do? But I don't know, we'll see. But it's a crazy time for sure.
Yeah, it's gonna be. Different when like those non-revenue coaches like all walk into the athletic director's office together and be like, we are not going to keep doing this. Like, this is insane. And then that'll just, I do think, Ryan, though, that'll work itself out where you'll get your regional conferences back, just not for football.
That would make the most sense. And college football is nutty as it gets, and it doesn't always make sense. But I mean, I think you could do this where it doesn't matter what conference you play. If it's a non-revenue sport, play people in your region. And we've already had things set up, with the Pac-12 and all the different conferences. So that would just make a lot of sense where you don't have to have everybody. Football is just different. I think over the years, people didn't want to treat it differently. They didn't want, I don't think it should be part of Title IX. I mean, it creates all this revenue for every sport that's out there. It's almost like it has to be a separate organization, I think. And we'll see. I mean, maybe that's going to happen going forward, but I don't think you can keep college football and like water polo in categories just going forward. It just doesn't make much sense.
I appreciate it. Again, Ryan Abraham, USCFootball.com, Inside Troy. Craig?
So, Ryan, before we let you go, going back to the Trojans specifically, so the change at defensive coordinator, the changes on the staff, kind of what remains, I guess, besides the Caleb Williams decision, what is on y'all's radar as far as the big moves to be made here in the next few weeks and months?
They got to see about the staff. It's already, and we'll see kind of where that goes. And I guess sort of what he's going to change as far as team and how to prepare, and will practices be different and all that. I think he turned UCLA defense around, and what he did do that in college football with a defensive coordinator, just different scheme, different everything, and you can kind of with the same personnel, UCLA from 2020 to 2023 went from defense to like the teams. They've done a lot better with not really adding a lot of people. That's the biggest one you're going to do this offseason. But really just hasn't gone as well. High school recruiting for Lincoln Riley. I think USC is not the best when it comes to NIL.
All right.
He's going to build on.
Ryan, thank you very much. We lost you there for a little bit. Ryan Abraham on mainly the coach from North Dakota State joining the staff, but a lot of things USC after an incredibly disappointing year with what they ended up at 7-5. Now,